Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. I hope you're well and healthy and hanging in there. Let's crack on with today's fantastic webinar. My name is Sergio Lara Bercial, and I'm delighted to be your host for today's iCoachKids Shares live webinar. This is already our 15th live event. I have with me my co-host, Gary Hodson. Hi, Gary, how are you?
Hi, Joe. Very well, thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you guys for making the time to join us today. Today we're going to explore driving continuous development in youth sport with two absolute leaders in this area, Professor Gordon Bloom and Professor Wade Gilbert. Both Gordon and Wade work across the Atlantic, with Gordon at McGill University in Canada and Wade at Fresno State University in the USA. And I'm super excited to have them on the webinar today. They are great friends personally, but also great role models for all academics and practitioners around the world. Gary, I'm going to hand over to you for the domestic side of things.
Okay, hi everyone. Just the usual rules. And if you haven't been here with us before in an iCoachKids Shares webinar series, please keep your cameras and your microphones off for the duration of the webinar. Use the chat function in Zoom or alternatively the comments on YouTube to submit your questions, and we'll ask the presenters at the end of the webinar. And please be respectful to all. We're all here to share and learn. In the meantime, why not subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch over 120 videos, which include our massive open online courses, which are free. Read one of our blogs on the iCoachKids website and follow us on social media. You'll notice that our Twitter handle has changed this week to iCoachKids World, which is a great celebration of us moving to be a big global movement. Over to you, Sergio.
Thank you. Okay, so let's introduce the topic. Today, we're going to talk about driving continuous development in youth sport. Knowledge, strategies, and behaviors employed by coaches are often designed not only to create cultures of excellence, but also successful and well-balanced athletes and participants. In order to achieve this, there is a growing emphasis on coaches to acquire knowledge and learn from a wide range of resources. Our presenters today will outline their work around the importance of learning through practice, reflection, and building a positive learning support network. I will introduce Gordon first. Dr. Gordon Bloom works for McGill University in Canada and is a professor in the Department of Kinesiology and Physical Education. Gordon's research is world-renowned and he's published extensively in the area of coaching. His main areas of interest are coach learning, mentoring, leadership practices, and team building. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Gordon. Please welcome Professor Gordon Bloom. Hi, Gordon. How are you?
Hey, Sergio. Thanks for having me here, and really looking forward to speaking to everybody today.
Thank you so much for making the time. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. So it's good morning for me, but I know it's good afternoon for a lot of people. Really happy to be here. I've known Sergio for many years. Just met Gary, and really fond of what they're doing. And Wade and I have worked together a number of times over the years, so happy to get to see Wade as well. So as Sergio said, I work at McGill University, which you can see is in the top right-hand corner of my slide, where I'm a professor of sports psychology. And whenever I give a webinar or a presentation, I always like to give a shout out to all of my current and my former graduate students who have really done all the hard work and put in the time. And you can see a photo of some of them in the top left. I'm sure a few of them are even attending today's talk. So thanks to all my grad students. Not only do I do my research in coaching and youth sport, but I've spent a lot of years, almost 20 years, coaching as well. I have 3 children, all of whom play or played youth sport. 2 sons and a daughter, and I've been coaching them in ice hockey, no surprise, I'm in Canada, but also baseball and soccer. So this is a real passionate topic for me, and I'm always happy to do research on something that I love doing. And again, just before I get started, I always like to talk about the research that I do and how much I enjoy it. And over the years, I've really been fortunate to meet a number of outstanding coaches. You can see in the bottom right, there's Wade and I. We did a seminar for the U.S. Olympic team, and there's a coach, Anson Dorrance, who's a very famous women's soccer coach who we got to meet. And on the left there, you'll see John Wooden, somebody else that has influenced both Wade and myself. And we both had the good pleasure to meet him on a few times before he passed away. And he's had a big influence on the research that both of us have done. So just before I sort of got into the nuts and bolts of today, I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about who I am. Sergio and Gary gave Wade and I a number of topics to choose from. And these are the two that I sort of decided I was going to focus on today, which would be coach learning and how you can build a positive culture by managing difficult athletes. So when it comes to coach learning, there's a lot of us in coaching science who study either the formal learning of coaches and the informal learning. I'm sure a lot of you are here, have taken your formal learning, coach education courses. I know in the UK, we have a very similar pattern to what we have in Canada, and it's a very structured and important way of coach learning. But there's also informal learning, which talks about the experiences you had as an athlete and coaching, your interactions with other coaches, and your mentoring. And there was a quote that came out in 1989 by Sage that really, I think, encapsulates the type of work that I do. And he said it is primarily through informal learning experiences such as reflection, mentoring, and communities of practice that coaches begin to get a feel for what coaching is, how coaches behave, and how day to day responsibilities are filled. And it's really this quote and informal learning that has really had the most influence and impact on the research that I've done. And I decided that I would share for each of the two topics that I'm going to talk to you about, that I would pick sort of a research article that had a really strong applied focus that would help me share with you some of the knowledge that I think is important, and in this case, about coach learning. So, this is a study we published 3 years ago called Creating and Sustaining a Culture of Excellence: Insights from Accomplished University Team Sport Coaches. We had 6 coaches from university sports in Canada who had combined to win more than 30 national titles. So very, very successful on field, on court, on ice success. But these were also coaches that were recognized for the way they developed their team and created these cultures of excellence. So we spoke to them about how they learned to create this culture of excellence and what they learned along the way going to so many national championship games. And I'm going to talk about 3 specific results from this study. The first one is self-reflection. And I'm going to read you a quote because I think it really talks to you about what I'm trying to share. One coach said, "I was an inexperienced and young coach the first time we went to nationals." That's the national championship. "I did not have an experienced staff. We lost that championship and I felt like it was my fault. After that first time at coaching at nationals, I went back and wrote notes for myself. What not to do to win a national championship: panicking, feeling angry, trying to control all players and support staff behaviors. You cannot do these things." Another thing that helps these coaches learn and get better is interacting with other coaches. "I still go to a lot of conferences," said this one very successful coach. "The good thing about coaching conferences is that you meet a lot of people, but you have to ask questions. A lot of people do not ask because they are afraid, but I tell them, ask the question. I am a fanatic of getting better. I have learned by reading books and by talking with other coaches." And the third topic that I want to talk about is, if you know my research and what we do in our lab, mentorship is a big one. And not surprisingly, it came out in this study. And one of our coaches said, "I have a mentor. She has shown me that she really trusts me and that she is proud of what I do. She has mainly helped me to improve myself. Her mentoring has nothing to do with the name of my sport. She has never given me any advice on the game. She makes me feel that what I do is okay. She is always there to answer my questions and to show me that she is happy with what I do." So if you're looking at coach learning, I have three take-home points for you. And I really think these points carry over to whether you're coaching youth sport or high performance sport. And the first thing is, and I think Wade might talk about this as well, because we've been talking about this since we were graduate students 25 years ago, is learning through your own mistakes, through self-reflection. It's really important to self-reflect, and it's okay to know that you make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Reach out to others for wisdom and advice. Go to conferences, develop communities of practice, find other people to talk to, and cultivate mentorships. No matter what level you're at, mentorships is a great way to learn. Finds if you're, and that's as a mentee or as a mentor. You can learn both ways, but it's a valuable learning experience. So that's my talk on coach learning, the first half of today's talk. The second half is going to be managing difficult athletes. And when I was trying to put together this topic, again, I was trying to figure out what might resonate with the people that are listening. And then I thought, well, who doesn't have difficult athletes to coach? Let's face it, we all do. And there's a study that was just published this year in the Psychology of Sport and Exercise that actually addressed this topic. And actually, let me stay here. Our participants were coaches of elite ice hockey players aged 16 to 20 years old. So this is sort of the drafting level just before professional hockey. In Canada, hockey's a big sport. So we were very fortunate to get sort of the top developmental hockey coaches in Canada to talk about how you handle difficult athletes. And when we started this topic, we looked at the 80-20 rule that's basically in business and industry that says, managers spend 80% of their time dealing with their difficult people and not enough time with the people who are performing. There was one study that did this, and they talked about coaches and they talked about cancer athletes. And they said, if I spend 80% of my time with the negative players, not enough time is spent on reinforcing positive and good behaviors. So true, isn't it? Of course, we all deal with that. So what I'm going to present to you today are some strategies for actually managing difficult athletes, how these coaches dealt with it. The first thing that you need to do is identify them early. And granted, these coaches said that as they gained more experience, they were better able to do this. So those of you who are inexperienced, it may take some time, but the key is trust your gut, identify them as the people early. The one coach said the most important thing when you have a difficult athlete on your team is identifying them as quickly as possible. So I think we all get that, we all buy into that, but what do we do with it? Well, one of the things our coaches said, and this was really neat, was that one of the things they tried to do was avoid putting a negative label on an athlete and sort of centering that athlete out as a problem athlete. They said the minute you do that, you're going to lose the athlete and it just sort of self-perpetuates. What they tried to do was transform this athlete into a contributing member of their team. One quote said, you never want to identify players as troublemakers or something that's going to become a reality. You don't want to brand them as troublemaker because I find that it perpetuates the troublemaking. Coaches found that it's really important to connect with their athletes on a personal level and treat them with respect. And they said this was even more so for the difficult athletes. A lot of times the difficult athletes had grown up in very troubled environments, and that's why they were acting out. So these coaches said it's really important to try and reach out to them. One coach said, I'm a big believer that coaching is about relationships, and you have to get to know your players to coach them. You have to coach your team consistently, but you must have an understanding that everybody on your team is a different person. You have to get to know them well enough to know what makes them tick. After connecting with them, you got to show the athletes that you care for them as human beings. And this is something that coaches have told me over the years. It's important to connect with athletes. One coach said there aren't too many 16 or 17-year-old kids who are going to lay it out on the line until they know that you care and have a really solid relationship built. And again, this goes from grassroots levels all the way up, and I think is even more so for the difficult athletes or the ones who are giving you some hard times. What can we do to sort of help and facilitate this transition? Our coaches talked about the other people who are on their coaching staff. So it could be the equipment manager. It was always assistant coaches. They placed a big premium on team leaders. And if you're not coaching in youth sport, or if you are coaching in youth sport, maybe not as much, but certainly having mature, responsible veteran players help, mentor the young players help. And we also talked about in this study billets, which are families where the players were living because they were living away from home. So they were living with a billet family. So our coaches said it's important to have these other people, these other actors on your side to help with the facilitation. One coach said, I think that in order to have a good relationship, your off ice staff, your coaching staff, and your support staff have to be on the same page and have to share information freely and openly. So, my final, just wrapping up here, my take home points on difficult athletes. First thing, identify them early. Second, set clear rules and expectations for them. But by doing that, you're also trying to build a high quality relationship and show the athlete that you care about him or her as a person. And lastly, reach out to important others. Don't try and do this alone. Get everybody on board and try and go in the same direction to turn this athlete around before you actually cut the athlete from your team. And it did come up, and our coaches said there is a time where you do have to cut bait, but they don't do that right off the bat. They try to go through all these different steps to facilitate a transformation. So thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. And if there's any questions at the end, I'm certainly going to be happy to answer them. Sergio, was that okay?
Fantastic, Gordon. Thank you so much. So many clear messages there that I think will be really, really helpful for all the people watching. And I will come back to those during the question round. For now, we're going to move on to our next speaker. Dr. Wade Gilbert is a professor in coaching and sports psychology at Fresno State University in the USA. Another close friend as well, and another fantastic role model. Wade is an internationally renowned coaching consultant and a sports scientist, as well as an award-winning professor. His main areas of interest are in coach learning and building positive learning cultures for coaches. Welcome, Professor Wade Gilbert. Wade, how are you?
Good. How you doing, Sergio?
Very well. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us today. I know things are difficult at the moment in California with all that's going on there, so we appreciate really your efforts to be here today. I'm going to hand over to you. So off you go.
All right. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to the webinar today. I'm going to go ahead here and share my screen and get right into it. Okay. Sergio, before I start going too far, the video looks fine. Screen. All right, here we go. Okay. So welcome, and thank you for this opportunity to share with you today some of the things that Gord already started talking about in terms of continuous improvement in youth sport. And I just put up a quick link there to Twitter. I have a Twitter account. That's one way that I share a lot of coaching material and things that people share with me. So if you want to continue a bit of a conversation afterwards, that's an opportunity to do that. So I decided that I would take a few minutes today to share a few things that I've learned around this topic of building a positive learning culture for coaches. And I have examples in here from working with coaches at all different levels. A lot of the examples, though, will be more with high performance sport, but the principles are the same, whether you're working for what I'm going to share today, whether you're working with youth sports settings, kids, or high performance sport as well. And the big idea that I want to work around or talk around today is this idea of building learning and support networks. And to be able to be your best as a coach, to become the coach you want to be, and you want to be for your kids, you can't do it alone. And I know a lot of coaches are very independent minded, very driven. They like to lead and they like to take control of situations, but you won't get to where you need to be and want to be if you try and do it on your own. And we have lots of research to show the value of coaching and learning to coach in a community of coaches, a learning and support community. And it always strikes me when we think about all the support networks, learning and support networks that we put around our athletes, even with young kids, there's lots of support for them to learn and to get better from family, peers, friends, may have, a coaching staff, other resources. But when we think about a coach, what are the resources that we put around a coach to help them with their learning and support network? In many cases, there's nothing. You're around people all the time, but you're very lonely. You're very isolated in a sense, socially in a sense. And so when I do workshops around this, I hand out a worksheet that looks just like this, basically, we coach with all the circles around it. And I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the activities that I would normally do if we were together in a workshop. And so you can take this and reflect on this and maybe try this on your own. But I would encourage you to write the names of people that nourish you as a coach, who's in your learning and support network as a coach. So we go through this part of the exercise. You may write 2, 3, 4, 5 names, and you'd be surprised. Even high performance coaches sometimes only have 2 or 3 names in here. So the goal isn't to get as many names as possible, but to have some people that you trust in there. And then I'd go a step further and I'd push you to look at those names now and ask you, are there any names in there that are outside your sport? So if you're coaching cricket, let's say, for example, or ice hockey, are you only surrounding yourself with other cricket or ice hockey coaches? Because if you are, you're really limiting your ability to grow and become the coach you're capable of becoming. You need to get people in your learning and support network outside of your sport. They will expand your vision and your mental model of what's possible and really help you grow. Also, do you have any non-coaches in your learning and support network? Typically, the first step when we do this exercise, people list a bunch of coaches. But what about people who are outside of coaching? Friends, peers, reaching out to people, sports scientists, people in business, education, counseling, psychology, people in other related fields that could really help us understand how to work with people. Because again, the essence of coaching is building people. You're in the people business. So why not have other people in your learning support network who understand how to build people? Let's bring those people into our network. And then I like to use this example. Some of you may recognize him, Steve Kerr, here in the bottom center picture with the blue tie sitting on the bench. He's currently the head coach of the Golden State Warriors, one of the most active coaches in the world at the moment in terms of sharing how he learns and what he learns. And you'll see, and very successful, obviously. And what you see in this picture, the common thread or denominator, I guess, across all these 3 pictures is not Steve Kerr, but the guy sitting beside him, the guy with the glasses and the yellow tie, and his name is Ron Adams. And up until until last year, he served as one of the assistant coaches for Steve Kerr and his staff, Golden State Warriors basketball team. And you'll see Steve Kerr in another picture with the Boston Celtics coach, Brad Stevens, and you'll see him in another picture here with the former Chicago Bulls coach, Thibodeau. So why do I share this? And what's this have to do with what we're sharing today? Well, Ron Adams' role as a coach was to coach the head coach. And there was a nice story written about this in the New York Times. You could look this up if you want. Just search New York Times, Ron Adams, coach. And you'll see here, this is a quote from Steve Kerr. Why would you hire Ron Adams? And he said, I wanted a truth teller. And when you think about how we grow as coaches, you need people close to you on a regular basis who will give you unfiltered feedback to help you get better. You don't need so if you think about it, well, at the end of the season, I'll go to a clinic, or before season, I go to a clinic and I try and learn, talk to other coaches. But if you do that once a year, once a season, you're really limiting your ability to get better. Plus also the need to nourish your coaching energy in a sense, right? So you need energy givers and truth tellers. And this is the role that Ron played everywhere he's been. That's why the top coaches in the NBA hired him to serve as an assistant. And then they and he wanted him to sit right beside them on the bench so that they would have an opportunity to learn from him all the time, not just occasionally. So then we go back to our worksheet and I would say, okay, well, who are your truth tellers? Who's your Ron Adams? Who do you have, or do you have anyone in your group, in your circle, your learning support network that would really be able to give you that unfiltered feedback on a regular basis? The rest of the session, I'm going to share a couple of strategies, or four in particular, that I've seen to be quite effective in helping to build your learning and support network. And I refer to these as strength, studying topics, studying coaches, and then also creating, for lack of a better term, a book club for coaches. So let me share with you a few examples here. In terms of strength spotting, when we think of continuous improvement, unfortunately, our default is looking at gaps. What do we need to get better at? Let's look at all the things we're not good at and try and get better at those. But what we're seeing more and more with really successful people, a lot of this comes from the business literature and now more and more in coaching, is what if we started with strength? What if we started by taking an inventory of the things we're really good at already? And there's some neat literature around this referred to strength spotting. And so one of the exercises that I like to do in workshops is this one right here, getting coaches to reflect on their strength. And so I would ask them to complete these activities here. What was your best day of coaching this past season? Or you could insert this past week or this past month. But the key is the second bullet here. Why was that your best day? And when you take time to reflect on this, it gives you tremendous insight into when you're at your best, your strength, and things that maybe you're naturally good at. And then we have a conversation around, well, why can't we have more days like that? What's in the way of you being at your best more often or on a regular basis, right? And so let's remove some barriers to allowing you to be your best, as opposed to focusing on, well, here's all my deficiencies. Let's try and build those up. Let's first start by looking at what are my strengths and how can I create environments that allow me to be like that more often. Another way to get better is to study topics. And this is probably the most common one. If you really want to get better as a coach, you identify things you want to learn more about. This might be related to some gaps or deficiencies. So this might be the more standard way of doing things. And I share a couple examples here. Coach John Wooden, he was voted coach of the 20th century here in North America, widely considered one of our great teacher coaches. He did this every year, 40 years of coaching. At the end of every season, he would prepare a self-study project, and he would go and learn very deeply on one topic. So you can imagine if you're doing that over years, you can become quite good. And then the other picture here is Bill Belichick, head coach of a football team, American football team here in the United States, very successful. And he took it a step further. And at the end of every season, he requires every single one of his staff to go and learn deeply on one thing. So he forces them to go and do a self-study. And then they come back a few weeks later and they all share what they learned. So you can see he's created a learning environment, a learning organization for his coaches. Another way to get better is to study coaches. So we can study topics, things we want to get better at, or we can go and study other people that we want to learn more about. And this is one of my favorite examples of this, a guy named Cameron McCormick. He's in the bottom picture with Jordan Spieth, the golfer with the green jacket after he won the Masters. He was former #1 player in the world. And But he decided, he took it upon himself. He was a former golfer, Cameron McCormick, and he decided quite early when he was coaching young athletes, actually Jordan Spieth when he was an adolescent, he decided I need to get better, and or I'm not going to be able to coach this kid. So he wrote a letter. And it was the same letter, he just changed the name at the top to the top 75 golf coaches in the United States. There's a list published every year of the top instructors, top coaches. And he had one question. Basically, he introduced himself and he said, hey, and he wasn't any famous coach. He was just starting. He said, I coach kids and I would love to come and watch you coach to learn how you do what you do. And about 20, I think 20 or 25 of them said, sure, come on back. But most importantly, the number one person on the list, the top golf instructor in the United States, this guy named Hank Haney, who was Tiger Woods' coach when he was number one, said, yep, come on out. So he took the initiative. He went out on his own time and money to go and watch this world-renowned coach and then learn. And we still do some tours, study tours, where we bring coaches together to learn from other coaches. This is something that I'm starting to see more and more at the high levels, but we could do this as youth sport coaches as well in our local communities. And one thing, working with high schools and working with kids, I've started to do this where we'll go out and I'll have my grad students, for example, we'll go out and we'll interview the best coaches in our city, in our community. And then we'll break those little interviews into short clips related to coaching topics. And we actually created a coaching channel here in our city for that, which we're still trying to build out. But the idea is go and learn from other people and then share what you're learning. So you build up your coaching and learning community. And the last one here I'm going to share with you is this idea of a book club. So coaches are notorious for being great book starters. And we all are. I'm sure all of us on this call, we love starting books, right? We have our shelves and our desk full of books that we started, but very few that we've actually finished. And it's hard to finish books on your own, and it takes focus and diligence to do that. And there's always a new book that's coming out. And I remember Coach Wooden one time saying, the problem with new books is it keeps us from reading old books. There's lots of great material out there. We don't need the next best book. So how can we do this more efficiently? Do it together. Learning is most effective when it's social and you have accountability to other people, right? So we have book clubs for everything else. And this really hit me when my daughter, one day I saw on her phone, she had opened the Harry Potter book club. I thought, well, why don't we have book clubs for coaches? And so I put some examples of different books that I've used with coaches and I found useful. Two in particular at the bottom there that I'm reading at the moment, a new book by Jerry Lynch on team culture, and then another book here called Coach to Coach, which is a fable about a coach who was struggling and he met a mentor. Gordon would love this book. It's all about mentoring, really. And but it's told through a fable. And so when you connect with other people, say, hey, what if we read a book together? Let's commit to reading a book together and we'll meet every couple of weeks. And it makes a huge difference in terms of accountability and also the learning that will come from that. And then, of course, podcasts. So you could have a podcast club, right? It doesn't have to be a printed book. And I know a lot of the coaches and students I work with really like podcasts. You listen to them in the car when you have opportunities. You don't have to necessarily read a book. These are some that at the moment I found personally and through working with other people to be quite interesting for coaches, specifically for coaches. And you can see the iCoachKids podcast, of course, is on there. But the Way of Champions one and the Flying Coach one, and then I also put up here Where Others Won't with Cody Royal. These are all free. You can go and explore them on your own time, but I encourage you to go out and study through this method as well. So I'll leave you with this today. You think about, as you move forward, ask yourself, what's one topic I want to really learn more about as a coach? Maybe two coaches that I would like to go and observe. They could be local coaches, but they could also now with Zoom, right? You could contact any coach in the world and ask them if you could have a conversation or maybe watch them. And then also a book or a podcast that you want to commit to learning from. I'll leave you with this quote here. It's what you learn after you know it all that counts. This is from John Wooden, and just reinforcing that idea that it's the best coaches are the ones who are constantly seeking out ways to get better. It's all about continuous improvement. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share some of those ideas with you today, and I'll go ahead here and stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Wade, and thanks, Gordon. Lots of great ideas there, really, and it's always the same thing. You know, I've heard you speak multiple times, and I spent countless hours with you, and I'm always taking lots of notes, really. And incidentally, I wanted to show you a book and how well it's being used and how much we've learned from that. Gordon, when are you going to get a book out? Come on.
I'm working on one now with my former graduate student, Chantal Valet. So it's almost done.
And that will be a great book. Chantel's story is really, really important. Okay, so I'm gonna get us going really with a couple of questions, and then I'll hand over to Gary for some questions from the audience. I'm gonna go first to Gordon, really, and Gordon, you mentioned really the idea of coaches being, well, basically being curious, really, either through self-reflection, through learning from other coaches, and obviously governing bodies of sport, federations, the organizations that look after coach education in a particular environment, they're trying to encourage this, okay? But in your experience, are some coaches more curious than others? Can we foster this attitude in every coach? How do you feel about that?
I think the answer is yes. But to me, you know, we've somehow created a culture and I'll stick to youth sport of I think it's more about secrecy and I don't want to share my, my tricks of the trade, or I don't want to tell somebody else what makes me so wonderful. And I think we have to sort of break down those barriers first and encourage everybody to share, reflect, become curious, ask questions. I mean, I was one of the things Wade said that kind of caught my eye. Something that goes back to one coach said said to me that I used in my dissertation for my PhD work. He was the coach of the Canadian national hockey team, and he said to me, all of my practices in the arena here in Calgary, which is the city where he worked, are open to the public. I said, what do you mean open? He says, any coach at any level can come watch any one of my practices every day of the year. And I said, wow. And I said, that's amazing. And he said, well, we need to learn to share. We need to change the culture. And he goes, and anyways, I don't mind if people see the drills that I do. It's the way I teach that really, I think, what makes me a great coach.
Yeah, and I really, really, really support all of that, really, from my experience. But I'm gonna go back to Wade on this, really, because this idea of sharing sort of links a little bit with the idea of the communities of practice that you've both mentioned. So, Wade, I was gonna suggest, I mean, like I said, communities of practice is a term that is used a lot lately. But what really are they, and what makes them successful? When does a community of practice becomes really successful?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, because I actually was debating this morning changing my slides to put in a few slides around communities of practice, because we have done a fair amount of research in that. And this all sounds great in theory, right? Yeah, let's get together and once a week and talk about coaching and share resources. It never happens. And one of the reasons in my experience, or it starts and then it fades away. And this comes down to environments dictate behaviors. There's decades of research in all fields that show that. So intention's great, not going to happen unless the environment dictates that it's going to happen. So I encourage athletic directors, youth sport directors, club directors, like you think of your great football or soccer clubs, right? They build in, it's part of lesson study as an example in Finland and Japan with teachers. It's built into their regular schedule. It's not, hey, Friday night, let's go out and talk about coaching. No, 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 no. This is part of our workday. This is from 1 to 2 o'clock. It's a class period where we get together as teachers and we review lesson plans and we give feedback to each other. We come and watch each other teach in each other's classes. It's not an if time. And so you can do the same thing in sport. In fact, I had this conversation in New Zealand with Sport New Zealand, and I said, you know, if you want your coaches to learn from each other, you have to create that environment. You can't hope it happens or just encourage them to do it. So I said, why don't you give them, you know, you have some resources, uh, basically give them a coffee budget. Okay, so you go and watch another coach's practice and we'll pay for you guys to go for, or girls go and have coffee. Okay, so you all get a coffee budget if you're using it to interact with other coaches. Another thing you can do, if you have a pitch, a field, a rink, whatever it might have, a gym, schedule occasionally at least more than one team to practice at the same time. You get half court or you split your field into quarters or whatnot, right? We do this in hockey in America quite a bit now. They've done it in other countries. You split the rink into threes and you have multiple teams out there running practices at the same time. So guess what? Now the coaches are in the same place at the same time. It's not go and find some time on your own schedule to go and interact. No, no, no. We're going to put you together on Wednesdays. 3 of you are practicing on the same pitch. Now, and then you can build from there. So you could actually designate either someone from the club, or you could have a peer facilitator, maybe a retired coach. There's a lot of my experience. There's a lot of youth sport coaches that follow their kids, right? They coach while their kids are playing. Their kids leave, they leave too. But there's still a lot of them who still have a huge passion for the sport and want to be around it. And now they're retired, so they have time, right? Bring them back in and they can serve as peer facilitators, and then have some time after that practice, 10, 15, 20 minutes. You're all there before you take off, get in your cars and drive home. You're already there. Let's debrief our practices, talk about, you know, the way things work today, some questions. So you can create environments to make that happen.
And that gets us back to the idea of the mentors. Really, can we create that network of mentors that can support? No, I was going to say beginner coaches, but it's not even that. We all need a mentor, really. And in the research that we've done, you know, with really successful coaches, they identified that they all had at least one mentor that was really influential. And I was going to ask a question of you both, really, but let's go with Gordon first, really. In terms of the mentors, I mean, we know that sometimes that relationship is a face-to-face. The mentor is in the same building. It could be your assistant coach, like Ron Adams. But sometimes that mentor can even be just someone that you look up to, someone that you've never talked to, and it's kind of a remote mentoring situation, even without the other person being aware. Gordon, how have you seen that with the coaches you work with? Did they all have that face-to-face mentor, or were they just inspired or modeling other coaches, or a mix of both?
Probably a mix of both, and very astute. A lot of people don't realize that technically, yes, someone can still be a mentor that maybe you've never met. It could be somebody that you've read about, that you've watched, that you've listened to. That person can still have a profound impact on you. Um, Obviously, the personal communication is more important, but um, coaches that I've met and some of the research that I've done said that people can have an impact, even if you haven't met them. There's also a little bit more now of, and I think Wade alluded to it earlier, sort of this learning by virtual means. We just recently finished a study with a colleague of mine in the US. We worked with the United States Lacrosse Association to do a peer mentoring project. And because some of the best mentors, the United States is a large geographical country, so a lot of the lacrosse coaches weren't in geographical proximity to have a face-to-face mentor. So we set up an e-mentoring program for them and found that it does take a little bit of more time to build the rapport and the trust that are part of mentoring. But I think there are different ways to do it. There is the face-to-face, but there's also the peer mentoring, or there's the learning from somebody that maybe you haven't even met. And I think all of these together have positives and maybe some drawbacks too, but the main focus is that mentoring is a great way to learn and develop as a coach and as a human being.
Thanks, Gordon. Wade, any comments from you regarding this idea of mentoring?
Yeah, Gord has definitely cornered the market on sport coach mentoring. So, you could look at his research to see what he's learned there. But just anecdotally, in my own observations, mentoring seems to work well when it's close. So for example, again, going back to, if you think of a typical youth sport club or youth sport organization, can we can we keep our coaches who leave, our retired coaches, let's say, can we keep them connected? So alumni, think of how great sports clubs keep the legacy going, that they have a strong connection often to their former players come back and speak to the team, former players come to big events and banquets, former players are post pictures, throughout the clubhouse, things like that. But what about coaches seem to just fade away. They're fired, booted out, quit, burned out, whatever, right? And then and all that local wisdom disappears with them. So I have seen in some cases where in college, for example, a coach will get fired, and so it's contentious, but 5, 6, 8, 10 years later, they come back to the program. So there's a bit of a cooling off period. But I think youth sport, we miss that opportunity with all those people in our community who have all that, like they spent 5, 7, 8 years figuring it out, and all that wisdom just leaves with them. So I think we could do a better job of keeping some of those people connected to our clubs.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Okay, we're going to move to some questions from the audience. I know there are some questions there, Gary, relating to the idea of dealing with the difficult athletes as well. So over to you, Gary.
Yeah, that's exactly where the first questions come in from Scott. So Scott is asking, in your opinion, both, and your experiences with problem athletes, who or what has been the greatest influencer or influencers in enabling or establishing the athlete's perceived problematic behaviors?
Wade, you want to go
I'll
first?
just jump in here. Yeah, sure. Well, two books that I just recently read really kind of get me thinking more about this. One is that Coach to Coach book, and it starts with this coach blowing up on the field with one of his athletes, and the athlete threatening to quit, and the coach going home totally burned out and anxious. And the other one is a book a former grad student gave to me. It's been sitting on my shelf for years, and it's by Dale Carnegie. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard of him or read it. It's How to Win Friends and Build Relationships, something to that effect. It's a classic book. And so for me, it just reinforces that it comes down to trust. And we like to point the finger, problem athlete, but as someone, a former player, remind me, it's important to point the thumb. Okay, problem athlete. What about problem coach? There, this is, I've contributed to this situation, and so can I look inward first and ask? Like Coach Wooden used to, one of his favorite statements was, "You haven't taught until they've learned." So if they're not learning, or if they're struggling, or they have discipline issues, let's start by looking at me. So how am I interacting with them? What are practices like? Are they bored? Have I created a toxic team environment? Maybe, not on purpose, but so start by looking at myself, but then also think about basic human needs. Every single person shares these basic human needs. They want to be connected. We're social by nature. We've evolved in tribes. So no one wants to be isolated. They might play that, especially kids, while they're kind of developing their self-concept and self-identity. But generally, people want to be connected. They want to be liked. They want to feel good about themselves and their skills, competence, right? So I think we have a tendency, it's easy to blame someone else. And so yes, there are people who cause us some headaches for whatever reason, but I'll just share one more thing, then Gordon can jump in. In social psychology, they talk sometimes about this idea of the ladder of inference. It's like a step up a ladder. So you take these steps. We see someone at practice, they're not paying attention. We take a step up the ladder. We infer why they're acting like that, we take a step up the ladder. Oh, Gord, here we go, Gord again, right? Then I yell at Gord, Gord, pay attention. Gord snickers at me. Oh, I take another step up the ladder. Okay. And so the behaviors seem to reinforce my inferences, but I never take time to figure out why Gord is acting like that. And last thing, I do an activity, I just did it with my coaching class. And I took it from the New York Times, a little teaching activity. I have all my students, and when I coach, I have my athletes do it too. On a sheet of paper, just write down one thing I wish my coach knew about me. And it's unbelievable what they write in there, things that you would never know. And it brings you back down that ladder of inference. Say, oh, I had no idea Gord's parents were separating. Geez, no wonder the kid's acting out. Just things that we don't take time to connect and understand their situations. And I don't want to pretend that there's not a time for discipline and consequences for people's actions, but I think just be careful first with making those inferences.
I could actually just dovetail off of that because good answer, Wade. It's almost like you read my paper. I sort of think the same way, and I think it sort of starts with the culture that the coach creates with their team environment. And I think, and it goes back to what Wade said about looking within. If you as a coach have created a culture and it's a positive, non-toxic culture, problem athletes can be dealt with, I think, in an easier, more effective, less turbulent way. And one of the things that, again, came out strong in our study was this idea of peer leadership and coaches relying on a group of peer leaders to sort of talk to an athlete who's acting out. And instead of the coach, when it can, escalate easily, or athletes may say things that they later regret. But if they're talking to their peers, they might be more comfortable. They might talk about what's happened. And I think that the good coaches or the more effective coaches that I've worked with have created an environment so they can identify the problem athlete early, but they have resources or tools beyond just themselves that can help de-escalate and control the problem and perhaps bring the athlete more into the team culture or environment.
Absolutely. Gary, I think there was a follow-up question really that might come in quite handy here around the where do we draw the line? I think Wade hinted at it really in the sense of okay, so we've tried everything. We've tried to find out why the player is acting out like this, and it's just not happening. There's no change. At what point do we draw the line, or what do we do before drawing that line, or where do we go?
Well, I'll start and then pass it to Wade this time. Like the coaches that I've met said, there has to be a line, and as a coach, you have to know the line. One of the things that I've learned from really good coaches is that they don't have a quick trigger finger, and they realize that when they do cut somebody or label somebody, that it's something that could stick with this young person for a long time. And it could have implications on this person's life, certainly in their sports. If you get labeled a bad apple at a very early age, it can stick with you and it can have really deep long-term ramifications. So I think the coaches that I've been exposed to, the really effective ones, are really introspective. They're really careful about cutting a kid or labeling him or her as a problem athlete, and they do their diligence to try and bring the athlete back into the team environment, to the team culture. But then they do have a line, and I guess it just comes a little bit with experience. And I guess the message that I'm trying to deliver here is don't be too quick to label and cut a problem athlete, because there may be more to it than you know, and you're going to have possible long-term negative ramifications on this young person personally and in their sport career. Wade?
Yeah, I'm thinking of a few kids I'm coaching right now in ice hockey. So we've all had them, but can we flip it in a sense? Can we use those behaviors and that fire and that defiance as an advantage, as a competitive advantage, as a strength. So instead of, again, we're not breaking horses, right? We're not training animals. We're building people, and people have personalities, and people have different strengths. And so that kid who maybe is fidgety and not paying attention and acting out, or likes to tell jokes and make wise cracks, can we actually use that as an advantage and actually assign that person a role? You know what? You're responsible for the joke of the day. When we come to practice, before we do our warm up, you're going to come in and tell, so kind of funnel that energy into a positive way, and it allows people to be themselves, so they can be the best version of themselves in a sense. So that's one thing that I've seen work quite well when you have the patience and make the time to really understand kids. Can I allow them to really be the best version of themselves and use those attributes that at first glance might seem counter to the way I operate? Can we actually use it to an advantage?
I mean, it sounds really. When Gordon was presenting, I wrote, you can't really fight fire with fire, because that normally always ends up badly. And I think when we get those athletes that are on fire in that way, we need to be the. I always say, who's the adult here? You need to be the adult in the relationship, and not fight fire with fire. Just and again, like Gordon said in his presentation. Uh, Really, if you show these athletes or these players that you really care, that tends to go a long way. Even if you don't do much after that, just by if they know that you actually care about them as a person, I find that goes a long way in resolving these kind of situations a lot of the time. Gary, any other questions?
Yeah, and I guess building on those points as well, I'm kind of mixing some of my own curiosity with that of Lara in the questions. I guess to a certain extent, a coach has to have a level of emotional control then, because obviously we as coaches, we're human too. We get annoyed, we get frustrated. So we have to manage our own kind of responses to particular problem behavior. I wonder, building with Lara's question, is there any advice or experiences you have of how to approach that situation initially with an individual?
Do you mean approaching the coach or approaching the problem athlete?
I would say the athlete to begin with, and then maybe to build back from there, how we help a coach recognize themselves in those emotive moments.
I think that's a huge thing. Um, I've had it myself as a coach when I'm coaching, and you see an athlete do something that you perceive as selfish or problematic or a discipline issue. And I always have to tell myself, stay calm. It's not the time to overreact. It's better to talk to the athlete after the game in private when people aren't around. I think it's part of just your coaching style. And, there are times to be passionate, but, a good coach once told me, she said, whenever I explode while I'm coaching, it's because I do it on purpose. And that sort of has stuck with me, like it's okay to sometimes lose your cool, sometimes lose your emotions, but make sure you're doing it on purpose and it's controlled. The same coach told me that sometimes she'll actually ask an athlete to misbehave during a practice. And she says, I'm going to rip you one when you do it, just as a way to send the message to the team. So I think that coaches that have their emotions under control or lose it when they're doing it on purpose is okay. I'm not sure if that directly answered the question, but hopefully gives you something to start with.
A
Well,
couple of things come to mind. One, again, a quote from John Wooden: equal treatment is not equitable treatment. So I think it's important from a very coaching kids, the youngest of ages, to reinforce that everything is earned. Playing time is earned, rewards are earned, attention from the coach is earned, distinctions, opportunities are earned. So trust is earned. You have to earn these things. That's an important lesson for kids to understand early on. Everything in life it must be earned. And so if you, there's, it's simple cause and effect. If you step outside the lines of our team standards and our team rules and things like that, you've earned the opportunity to sit on the bench. You've earned the opportunity to not come to practice tomorrow. Those are things that you earn, just like you earn the opportunity to start the game tomorrow. So helping them see that and reinforcing that. And I might challenge one thing Gord just said there. I had to have a challenge to Gord at some point. So I'm going to, I hear exactly what Gord's saying. And for sure in collegiate pro, high level sport, it's different. But I would really caution against losing your temper, even in a controlled way with kids. It just can really break some kids, and a lot of kids are fragile. A lot of kids have, again, we don't know their home environments. Kids have low self-esteem, self-confidence, whatnot. They're developing their self-identity. And so and I've been around coaches like that. We all have, I'm sure. I've been coached by coaches like that when I was a kid. And to think that, getting in a kid's face or blowing up at a kid is going to kind of teach them a lesson more often than not. It's going to teach them, this is not a place I want to be. And we're going to lose kids like that. So I hear exactly what you're saying, Gordon. I totally understand at higher levels of sport, but with kids, I'd be really careful about that.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to infer that. I was just saying the one time,
Mm,
if you want to send a message to
mm,
the team, you tell a child beforehand, hey, can I use you? Blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying to go off and behave like a tyrannical maniac at
mm,
all times. So
mm,
I'm sorry if that came across that way.
mm.
Guys, we are pushing for time now, and I know you guys you've got a full day ahead of you. We're wrapping up our day, but you've got a full day ahead of you. I'm just gonna one last comment, observation, see what you think. Really, I don't know if you've been watching the variety of all or nothing documentaries on Amazon Prime. You know what I'm talking about? Those fly on the wall. So basically, on Amazon Prime, you need to, if you don't subscribe, I'm going to get you to subscribe. Really, there are like normally there are around 8 to 9 episodes really where they follow a professional team over a season. Fly on the wall, cameras on in the changing rooms, in the team bus. Fascinating because it really gives you a relatively open door into that world really that we don't normally see. We only see them on the pitch or on the in the field. And there's been some fascinating I mean, particularly, for example, we are based in the UK, so there's been one with Jose Mourinho and Tottenham Hotspurs. There's been one with Pep Guardiola and Manchester City. And for me, watching that is fascinating, really, to get that open window into that environment and warts and all, really, in the middle of a changing room after losing a game and stuff like that. And I was just gonna take your views on how useful you think those are to coaches, or whether you think they are staged or anything like that. Have you seen anything of that ilk? Who wants to go for it?
Yeah, it does ring a bell now. I haven't watched any of the episodes, but other people have shared that with me, and we do have Amazon Prime, so and honestly, I haven't dug into those because to me they're entertaining. It's entertainment value. I don't know about educational value, especially coaching kids. I think that could be problematic, to be honest with you, because if there has always been, and I think there continues to be, unfortunately, this idea that we translate coaching and good coaching from those environments to kids' environments. So I'm watching a coach blow up in a locker room after a game, and as a coach I admire, Jose Mourinho or someone, I think, okay, well, that's what coaches do, right? These are the best in the world. So I guess that's what I should be doing after a game. Because where else do they learn these things? They don't have documentaries like that with great youth sport coaches, do they?
No.
And following them. So those become our models. So from an entertainment perspective, yeah, totally entertaining. But understand too, you've been there, I've been inside those environments, and those are filtered messages for sure. Those aren't, completely open. So you never really get the whole story. You get the story they want to share and they want to tell you. So And it's funny, one of the big over here, I'm sure many of you saw it too, the Michael Jordan, Chicago Bulls, The Last Dance, that documentary. Well, Michael Jordan was a producer of that. So that's Michael Jordan's version of Michael Jordan. Okay. So there's always an untold story there. There's always an angle. There's always an agenda. So from an entertainment perspective, totally love it. But I'd be careful to recommend those things to you sport coaches.
Watch with caution.
You know what? It's funny. I was honestly going to use that same example because I watched it this summer, the Michael Jordan documentary. And although it did get a little bit steamy at times, it still was filtered through Michael Jordan. You don't feel like you're getting the entire story. So honestly, Wade, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is you have to take these with a grain of salt. And I think sometimes we also have to be careful that if we do show like a negative coaching behavior, but the team has achieved success, that people will automatically assume that it's okay or that's part of achieving success. Back when I was in graduate school, there was a very successful college basketball coach, men's basketball coach in the United States, and his name was Bobby Knight. And there was many examples of this guy behaving way over the line. He would hit his players. He would throw pieces of like chairs and equipment. He would cuss and swear, but people would always hire him or justify, well, he wins. And just because, so if you show somebody who wins and they're doing things the wrong way, people may internalize that and think it's okay. And I always say, well, why don't you look at a coach who does it the right way and wins? Why do we always have to make excuses for those who do it the wrong way? So I think in a roundabout way, I'm sort of saying the same thing as Wade. He's got to be careful.
Sounds good to me. Okay, we're going to wrap it up there. Listen, Gord, Wade, thanks a million again for giving us your time today. Gary, thanks a million for the production behind and in front of the scenes. And thanks a million to everybody that showed up today and that will watch these on the YouTube channel. Everybody stay safe, stay connected, and have a great day. Thank you very much, everyone.